Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the May edition of the Research Showcase. My name is Dario, and I'm here today with a number of speakers. I'm delighted to have Aaron Halfaker, who's joined by Amir Sarabadani and Sage Ross, presenting today on ORIS, our machine scoring platform, and its adoption by tool developers in the community. And I also excited to have Gary Shea from the University of Washington. We're going to present a new research or research in progress about the Wikimedia fundraising banners and how we can use that data to understand donor behavior. As usual, the format is going to be the same, 25 minutes for each presentation, followed by a short Q&A. Aaron is going to start first, and we'll have plenty of room at the end of the showcase for additional Q&A. If you're joining remotely and you want to participate in a live Q&A, there's a live discussion on our IRC channel that you can follow on Wikimedia Research. And Miriam, who's here, is going to be our IRC host and relay any questions from the audience. And with that, Aaron, the stage is yours.
All right. Thank you very much, Dario. So today, folks, I want to talk to you about ORS and specifically how people are using ORS predictions and reflecting on how those predictions are used specifically in the context of quality control work. So let's start off with who am I? So I'm Aaron Halfaker. I'm a principal research scientist at the Wikimedia Foundation. I'm also the lead of a team that specializes in applied machine learning called the Scoring Platform Team. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about a few things. First, I want to give you some background on this ORS system that we've been building, which is sort of like a machine learning container, how it's intended to bring efficiency to a lot of Wikipedian processes and lead to more innovation in quality control work. Next, I want to talk to you about 3 case studies of appropriation and reflection on ORS. Specifically, I'll be calling out Wikidata's report mistakes page, Patrubot's behavior in Spanish Wikipedia, and some work that Sage Ross has been doing, which kind of questions what exactly we mean by quality when we build quality prediction models. And then finally, we'll have some time for some discussion of these things. I have Sage on the call with me, and I also have Amir Sarabadani, who is instrumental in setting up the Wikidata report mistakes page. So they'll be available for that 3rd section. Okay, so let's start off with ORS vision. What the heck is this ORS thing? Before I talk about what is ORS, I want to talk about why ORS is. And so I love timelines because everything came from somewhere, and it sort of helps you get a context to see sort of how I got to working on this project, why it exists in the first place. So back in 2007, there was a sudden shift in the number of active editors who are working on English Wikipedia. If you're familiar with my work, then I generally refer to this graph as the decline graph, where we see an exponential growth between 2004 and 2007, and then an abrupt shift to a decline. So it wasn't really until 2009 that we actually noticed that this was happening. There were a couple papers that were pushing on this, specifically Beaumois, the singularity is not near, noted that there was this abrupt shift. And I was also doing some work trying to figure out how people were treating newcomers in Wikipedia and what sort of effects that might have on retention. After the Wikimedia Foundation learned about this, they invested in a group of researchers to come and work at the Wikimedia Foundation. We called the program the Wikimedia Summer of Research. Over the summer of 2011, we produced a huge amount of research reports about what was happening to new editors, how population growth was changing over time, how newcomers engaged with help pages. There's a huge amount of reports that are sitting on the MediaWiki right now that are from this set of projects. So, but there were 2 critical things that came out of this work that I want to refer to. One is the tea house, which is a question and answer space that's specifically designed for newcomers to help them have a good time when they first show up on Wikipedia, instead of getting a strong quality control reaction, instead to get a kind and human reaction. And we published a peer-reviewed research paper that summarized these reports called The Rise and Decline of an Open Collaboration System. This is actually where that decline graph that I was just showing you came from. And here we summarize the sort of trade-off that English Wikipedia made between efficient quality control practices and good newcomer socialization practices. So in the year immediately after that, I got to work on trying to think about how we could do quality control and newcomer socialization differently in Wikipedia. And I developed a system that I called Snuggle. It's actually a play on the name of one of the quality control systems that was called Huggle, though unfortunate, I would love to be able to rename it, go back in history and do that. What you're actually seeing is a photo of me presenting about Snuggle at Wikimedia 2013 in Hong Kong. The Snuggle system used machine learning to try and help experienced editors in Wikipedia find good faith newcomers to support. It was sort of what I thought newcomer support might be if it was also supported by efficient machine learning technologies like quality control work was. So in the years after that, as I started working full-time at the Wikimedia Foundation, I started looking at Wikipedia more as a system than something that you could just, for example, parachute a technology like Snuggle into and expect for change to happen. So there were a couple presentations that I made in 2014 and 2015 looking at Wikipedia as a system. These I'll actually have links to these in just a moment. These are past showcases that were actually as a slot in one of these research showcase events. So I was looking at Wikipedia as a system, and I was looking at the quality control workflows that Wikipedians were engaging in. And I realized that there was something that could be done that would probably be much more impactful than Snuggle, this one interface for helping newcomers that only work for English Wikipedia. Maybe we could do something with the underlying infrastructure, and that's where ORS comes in. We released the first version of ORS, this machine classifier service for Wikipedians, in the summer of 2015, and the project has been going strong ever since then. But in the meantime, I've made a lot of presentations at this showcase, including research that we've done of either the classification technologies that ORS uses or the context in which ORS can be used inside of Wikimedia projects. So for example, in the deploying and maintaining AI in a socio-technical system showcase presentation, we talked about some of the biases that were cropping up in ORS and how we dealt with them. In the paper for building automated vandalism detection tools in Wikidata, we published the first paper that described building vandalism detection tools in a structured knowledge base. In the English Wikipedia quality dynamics presentation, we highlighted the power of quality classification and how that was allowed us to see the huge coverage gap that had grown over time in coverage of women scientists in Wikipedia, and how the work of Kaylana and her collaborators were able to close that gap. And finally, or recently, in February, I presented on backlogs and how they form in Wikipedia and how machine classification techniques can help make them tractable. So there's a ton of references here. This will be in the notes afterwards, and I'll probably actually throw this into a notepad and then just paste the link in IRC because it's kind of hard to click around the PDF, but the PDF will also be online later. So if you totally forget about this, you want to know what the heck I was talking about or look at some of these past showcases, you'll be able to reference this slide. Okay, so in summary, why is ORS? Well, Wikipedia has socio-technical problems with newbies. In our efforts to make quality control efficient, we ended up throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And many of these problems were really due to scale. When Wikipedia became enormous, we really had to focus on efficiency, and so something had to be optimized against. ORS is an attempt at addressing both of these things at the same time in a way that accounts for the complex dynamics of Wikipedia. Considering that Wikipedia is a distributed system, and doesn't have a central authority, there's conversations that are happening about the technologies that are developed. But our technologies have stagnated, and I want to talk a little bit about that before we move forward. But really, if you want to get an in-depth discussion of what I mean here about technology stagnating and why Wikipedia needs to solve these problems at scale, there's one specific showcase that I'd like to direct you to. This is from 3 years ago. Or is the People's Classifier Service. So ORS uses this basic machine classifier technology to help Wikipedians do their work. For example, in a damage detection classifier, something that's intending to catch vandalism, it uses a set of statistics about edits in Wikipedia, such as, was this edit saved by an anonymous editor? How many characters were added and removed in the edit? And as you might suspect, how many words were added that were part of a bad words list, like racial slurs and curse words and that sort of stuff. And this machine learning model is supposed to learn correlations between those statistics of an edit and whether an edit is actually good or bad. And then we can use that to make some predictions. Using one of these machine prediction models, in most wikis, we can effectively reduce the reviewing workload by about 90%. So for example, in English Wikipedia, there are about 160,000 edits per day. And using the classification models that we have in ORS, we can split those 160,000 edits into the 90% that totally don't need review, and we can be pretty confident that they're good, and the 10% that should probably be reviewed because they might have issues. And so really, this comes down to labor hours for people. Without ORS, or without any prediction models in place, it would take about 267 hours of work to review all the edits in Wikipedia that happen every single day. So this is about 33 people working 8 hours a day. But with ORS, or with one of these basic machine classification models, we can have people do the same amount of work and have guarantees that they're catching the almost all vandalism in just 27 hours. So this is 4 people working an 8-hour day, actually with a little bit left over. So this is enormous when it comes to efficiency. Before ORS existed, there were 3 sort of dominant quality control tools in English Wikipedia: Huggle, Cluebot-NG, and Sticky, and they all had their own machine classifier models. The idea, let's say that you had an idea for how you were going to do efficient quality control and do newcomer socialization better. Then the first thing that you'd need to do is develop your own machine classifier tool, because you can't do anything efficiently without that. And doing so is a huge amount of work. You should read about 20 research papers on Wikipedia damage detection. Machine classification isn't even part of a standard computer science degree, at least not at the bachelor level. And most volunteer tool developers, like the people who are working on tools for Wikipedians, don't have a CS degree anyway. There's a huge amount of labor intensive considerations to having this thing actually work in real time. And so you probably just pull your hair out and not develop this tool. This is sort of what we've seen. These tools remain dominant even today. You shouldn't be surprised then that all 3 of these tools were authored by computer scientists with extensive skills in machine learning and distributed systems. So essentially, when I look at this problem, I think about one of these graphs. This is a reaction energy graph that I stole from chemistry. Essentially, what we're looking at here is how much energy do you need to put into a system in order to get a certain reaction to take place. In this case, frying an egg, so denaturing the proteins inside of an egg so they turn from transparent into white. It happens at about 150 degrees Fahrenheit. But if you could have a catalyst, some chemical that might make that reaction happen more easily, then maybe you could fry an egg at room temperature, 72 degrees Fahrenheit. When I look at the type of progress that we need to make from where we are to where we want to be, where we are with dominant quality control tools that are not really designed with newcomer socialization in mind, to better quality control tools that are designed with newcomer socialization in mind, the activation energy is building one of these machine learning models, and that's standing in the way of progress. The whole idea of ORS is that it's a progress catalyst, and it gets these machine learning models out of the way so that people can experiment with new ideas and do new things with quality control work. And hopefully by that, we get a lot more things on the right side of this activation pathway graph. So this is essentially what my team does. We call ourselves the scoring platform team. We take this idea of a machine classifier, we centralize it so that everybody can take advantage of it. And so new technologies that maybe don't look like the old technologies can also take advantage of it. Or if you have an idea for how you might do things differently in Wikipedia, you can also take advantage of it too. And so what we've seen in the last 3 years is an explosion in the number of tools that are taking advantage of machine classification technologies. And today, what I want to do is talk to you about some of the instances where people have been taking advantage of these technologies that I think are interesting. It's a very small window into what we've seen around ORs, but I'm hoping to sort of whet your appetite so that you'll look more into this. We do have a research paper that I'll point to later that has some more of these case studies. Okay. The first case study that I want to, so I'll talk to you about 3 case studies today. The Wikidata false positives page, how Patrubot got banned in Spanish Wikipedia, and this notion of structural completeness that actually Sage will talk to you about that one once I get to that point. Okay. So there was a page that one of my collaborators, I believe he was a volunteer at the time, although he's now staff and works on the team, Amir Sarabadani, created in Wikidata. When we first developed our first damage detection system in Wikidata, Amir went about creating a few pages to sort of document the system. One of the pages that he created was this page called Report Mistakes. And you can see he says at the top, list here, please include revision ID or a link to the diff and why you think it's misclassified, thanks. And you can see that Wikidata editors are showing up with links to edits that they think were misclassified by the ORS prediction models. And from this, we learned some really cool things about Wikidata, how damage works, and how our prediction models can be better. A few highlights are that client edits can't be damaging. Client edits are a fun thing that only apply to Wikibase, where if you can actually make a change, say in English Wikipedia, and have it propagated to Wikidata. Merge edits are not reverts. It turns out that you can merge 2 items together, and in our process of detecting damage and training the models, we weren't handling that appropriately. And so by handling that appropriately, we could reduce these false positives. And another insight that our users gave us is that there was a lot of vandalism to commons categories. And that's something that we should specifically allow the model to key in on. So essentially, sometimes a Wikidata item will actually have a property for the relevant commons category. And so from this, Amir developed a table that lists out the false positive reports that Wikidata editors gave us. It lists the old score. So this is the confidence of the first prediction model that we deployed. So you can see in this column, they're all very high confidence. So they're all flagged as very likely to be damaged, and yet none of these are actually damaging. And through the process of taking these insights from the Wikidata editors and applying them to the model development process, we developed a series of models that made more and more improvement over the old models, and were less and less likely to flag these edits as damaging. And overall, in the end, this column is showing the overall improvement. What we want to see here is large percentage decreases to the prediction of vandalism. And so it's a little bit funny to see a plus here, but you should interpret this as all of the edits were scored less likely to be vandalism after we did these iterations with Wikidata editors. So kind of like a higher level insight that we had from this is first that false positive reporting is very valuable to model engineering, and that reporting the improvements to these models is a good way to build trust with the communities that we work with. Okay, moving on to the next case study, I want to talk to you about a really interesting bot that has been running in Spanish Wikipedia. And so depending on how familiar you are with English Wikipedia, you might be familiar with ClueBot. ClueBot NG is a bot that's been running in English Wikipedia for a very long time. It uses a machine learning model to automatically revert vandalism. It only will revert vandalism that it's very highly confident about, because it's really problematic if an auto revert bot makes mistakes. ClueBot predates ORs by several years. However, there was nothing like that available for Spanish Wikipedia. And so we rolled out our damage detection models for Spanish Wikipedia in 2017. And a user from Spanish Wikipedia then used those damage detection models to develop a bot that works very similar to ClueBot in Spanish Wikipedia called Patrubot. The problem with Patrubot is that it was too sensitive. It ended up making too many mistakes. And so right now, the bot is actually banned in Spanish Wikipedia. Essentially, what this says is if you don't read Spanish, is that the bot has been banned indefinitely because it made too many mistakes. Essentially, it was reverting too many edits that weren't damaging in its quest to revert the damaging edits. And so there have been quite a few discussions that have been happening around Spanish Wikipedia about Patrobot. In this thread, there's a post by the developer of Patrobot saying, hey, I took the bot offline. I see it's causing problems. I don't have time to dig into this right now, so it's probably better that it's been taken offline. But I think this conversation is really interesting because in these two responses, people agreed that the bot was making mistakes, but it was doing some really important work, and they're really hopeful that the bot can be fixed and brought back so that it can go back to reverting vandalism. And specifically, the conversation got to the point that they were discussing what false positive rate would be acceptable for this bot. In this case, this user, Bernard, is saying that he suspects that the bot was wrong about 40% of the time, which is very problematic, but it also means that it was right 60% of the time. And now that the bot is offline, those edits that would have been reverted are sticking around. And I thought this was really fascinating, that the conversation led to the creation of a page. This Santiago created this page for auditing Patrobot. And so there's a page in Spanish Wikipedia where they've taken 1,000 randomly sampled edits and that Patrobot has reverted and reclassified them to see how often Patrobot is making mistakes. There's one thing that I really regret about this, and it's sort of a big learning for our team, is there's a great way to find out where you should set your sensitivity thresholds if you're running a vandal fighting bot like Patrobot. If you go to this URL where I've highlighted the big relevant part here, you're actually querying the ORS service to ask, where should I set my threshold so that I know that I'm right 90% of the time, that I have 90% precision? And what this output tells us is that you should set your threshold at 0.962 for prediction confidence, and you should expect to catch about 16% of the vandalism with that, which is a decent percentage. I think that if the original developer of Patrobot would have done this from the start, then Patrobot would probably still be running in Spanish Wikipedia right now. So insights that we got from this. One is that precision recall is absolutely critical to auto-revert bots. Bot developers don't really have the time to manage the nuances of precision. And so I think that we have to get to bot developers before they deploy their bots, because we don't want to have them lose a bunch of social capital and then have to go back and make changes afterwards. And further, bot developers don't have a good way to know how to apply these threshold optimizations, this thing that I was just showing you, to pick the right threshold so that they cannot be too terribly sensitive. All right, charging forward to the last case study, I want to let Sage take over. So if we could select Sage's screen and get his screen share going, he can tell you what he's been doing with structural completeness.
Cool. Hi there. I'm Sage. I work for Wiki Education, and my job is mostly focused around helping professors run assignments where their students are editing Wikipedia articles. So one of the things that I do with ORS in my system is take the data for ORS Wikipedia 1.0 model, which is designed to estimate where on English Wikipedia's quality scale an article falls. So is this a featured article? Is this a stub? And in the academic context, like calling this estimate like article quality, which is what it's trying to like model, it's trying to model Wikipedia's own quality rating system, raises a bunch of red flags, because academics will be like, well, what's it really measuring? So are we showing my screen here? Is that working properly? I guess it probably is. So the things that it actually is measuring are like, it's measuring the word count, the reference count, the number of headings, the number of images, the number of templates, the number of paragraphs without any references, these kinds of things. So it's not actually about the meaning of an article, whether the facts are correct or whether the prose is clear or the tone is neutral. It's about these structural features. How closely do the structural elements of an article match a typical featured article or a typical stub? And so the kind of solution that we came to for this is to rephrase it and not call it quality, call this concept that ORS is measuring structural completeness. And so that's what we built into our dashboard for organizing courses and running them. And so you can do things like look at the ORS structural completeness score for a single article over time. So here's one, and you see kind of, this is a typical student article. You see kind of some early edits at the beginning where the quality is moving up and down. And then as they progress through their assignment, they sort of make some jumps in the article quality. And one of the interesting things is that even little tiny changes in quality where the ORS prediction is not changing what it guesses the Wikipedia score will be, it's still before and after estimated to be a start class article, for example. Even then, small changes in the ORS score are meaningful in terms of, like, you look at the diff that caused that change in score and you see why it moved in the direction that it did. And so that was really promising in terms of like an intuitive validation that what is being measured here is making sense. So another thing you can do is look at kind of the trajectory of a featured article. This is a longtime Wikipedian who's a visiting scholar in our program. And this is the kind of trajectory of him writing a featured article from scratch. So you see a ton of edits happening early on where the quality is rising very quickly and then starts to level off. And then over time, as reviews come in, you're getting like little changes after that. So that's kind of an interesting insight into the life cycle of an article. And the other thing that we do with it is for whole groups of changes that happen over a whole semester, we show, well, what is the aggregate change in quality? So this is a graph that kind of shows for about 9,000 articles that were edited in aggregate by a bunch of students in one term. What did the distribution of quality look like before and after? And so you see this shift going from lots of articles that didn't exist, this spike on the left, and then overall a shift in the curve over towards higher quality. And you can look at that for this guy, Vevalt, who specializes in writing featured articles. So he took a bunch of articles that were all over the place in terms of quality, and afterwards you get this really intense distribution right at the high end of the scale. So that is about it. One of the things about these graphs is that they were kind of inspired by manual quality assessment work that we had done back in 2010, 2011, where we had Wikipedians assessed on a 26-point scale the different aspects of article quality. And it's interesting that the ORS scores are very comparable in terms of like what you see before and after when a group of students work on improving articles over a semester. So that's what we do with what we call structural completeness based on ORS. Thanks.
Thanks, Sage. So, all right, onto part 3, and happily, part 3 isn't really a thing. Part 3 is just to tell you that we have a paper that covers these case studies and more. In fact, I go into depth talking about some of Sage's other work using our the interrogation systems that we have built into ORS to build a recommender system. The preprint for this paper is up on Meta, and I encourage you to go check it out. So that's all for today. And I think we can move on to the next speaker because I don't think that we have any time for questions. We'll probably have to do those after the hour is done.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron, and thanks, Amir and Sage, for joining. Hold on to your questions until the end of Gary's presentation. We'll have more time at the end. And with that, Gary, we're ready for your talk.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Gary Shea. I'm an associate professor here at University of Washington. Let me see if I can get the screen sharing going. Can you all see it? Assuming that's a yes. Yeah, so it's actually a nice segue from the previous talk. We actually use ORs in our work as well, so it will be another case study that you guys can cite. This is work looking at donation behaviors on Wikipedia, and we've been sort of thinking about this problem for a while. As Dario knows, we've been thinking about this for a while, and finally I was fortunate enough to get one of my students, Rafael Kochonik, to spend some time on this project, and I'd wanted him to give this presentation today, but he needs to get his generals done, so you guys get to hear from me instead. Anyways, I'm going to start. I'm not going to spend too much time on the underlying motivations of this work, because I'm sure y'all know the importance of donations to the Wikimedia Foundation. And here's some data from the 2015 to 2016 campaign. Right, and from here you can see that in that year the $77 million were raised from 5.4 million donations. And one of the things to note is also that it did only come from 5.4 million donations. If you compare that to, I think, some of the numbers of active users of various Wikimedia services, I think some of the numbers that I've been seeing are around 550 million users per month. So we're talking about still a very small percentage of people who are making these contributions. And there's still a lot of improvement, opportunities for improvement in terms of increasing donation rates. And doing A/B testing of banners, and we see this, when we go onto Wikipedia, and I've been kind of following the work as much as I could, and it's really interesting and exciting, and that's also sort of where I started thinking about this problem that we're going to be talking about. Is when I was looking at this, I was also thinking, well, we can't really just think about sort of banner without context. We also want to contextualize it in which the page that it resides on, right? It's possible that certain pages, certain quality and certain properties of the pages can also provide influence donation behaviors or even help us predict donation behaviors. Right? So if you think about the types of users who might be more likely to visit pages on Kim Kardashian, right, versus the type of users who are more likely to visit nuclear engineering, even though the banner ads may be the same, the one may actually be attracting a certain type of users who might be more likely to make donation contributions. And that really is the sort of the focus of our work here, is do donation rates differ systematically across pages and how? And so we started looking at this work, and we have some preliminary data to share here, and we'd love to get some feedback here as well. So kind of want to get into the related work a little bit and kind of set this up a little bit stronger. So one of the kind of underlying assumptions here is that the different pages on Wikipedia actually are attracting different types of users or different types of uses. Right, and so, and I do think that there's some work, recent work that is supporting this underlying claim. So one thread of work is some of the work that I've been doing, looking at people's values and how that predict their behaviors. I've also been able to connect people's underlying values with what they are more interested in reading. So through an experiment, I was able to show that people who value, for example, universalism, the welfare of others, are more likely to be interested in reading environment-related articles. And those who value achievement are more likely to be drawn to those articles about work-related articles. And so it's then possible that people are self-selecting in a way onto these pages in some different and systematic ways. Another thread of research is also a paper that was published last year at WWW, where they were looking at people, why they use and read Wikipedia. And they found sort of two general clusters of motivations for using Wikipedia. One is for school and work, where those users are more likely to read topics such as war and history, mathematics, technology, biology, and chemistry, etc. And there's also another cluster of those who are doing it primarily out of boredom. So they're more likely to be drawn to entertainment-related articles. And so assuming that the pages are indeed attracting different types of users or different types of uses, we also then need to be able to link that to donation behaviors, right? So why is it that certain types of users or certain types of usages are going to be influencing donation decisions? And there's a lot of prior work looking at sort of people's donation behaviors and donation decisions, looking at why people make charitable contributions. A lot of these factors include peer pressure, reputation concerns, trying to improve self-esteem, positive emotional feelings, sort of the warm glow effect, and even income and tax benefits. But if you kind of think about it, a lot of these factors wouldn't necessarily predict why donation rates would differ across pages, right? So let's use peer pressure, for example. The banners are generally framed from the Wikimedia Foundation or from Wikipedia, so they're not really getting a peer pressure in the same way that if your friend is asking you to donate. And even if there are banner ads that are being banners that are being tested in that way, those are still fairly systematic and consistent across the pages. And reputation concerns, right? And so a lot of these donations, you certainly don't need to announce that you've donated on Wikipedia. And if you do, you also don't need to say which page you were on when you made the donation. So it shouldn't matter which page you were on, and that shouldn't influence your donation decisions. And similarly, that would carry on to sort of improve self-esteem, positive emotional feelings, income tax benefits. If you donation $5 on the Kim Kardashian page, it should have similar benefits than if you donate $5 on the nuclear engineering page. But one thread of one key factor that has been studied in prior research that we think would apply here is reciprocity. Right. And so reciprocity, you can think of it as social norms, where people just through normative behaviors think that they should respond in kind to others. And then when applied in the charitable contribution context, basically what they found is that people make donations because they benefit from the charity's activities in the past or anticipate the need for their services in the future. Right. So applied in our context here, when we're thinking about the different pages, it might then be possible that people are getting some sort of utility and value from using these pages, and certain pages may offer more utility and value, and that might attract higher rate of donation than others. One prior work has suggested that the way that you kind of strengthen the effects of reciprocity is kind of to increase the strength, their sense of indebtedness, right? So a classical study would be giving participants soft drinks, and then they're more likely to comply with the experimenter's requests. And similarly, a lot of studies have been exploring sort of people's behavior in survey context, and that if you offer a small gift, people are more likely to sort of respond to your survey. And if you offer a larger gift, the response rates also increase even more. And so again, the idea here is that potentially those the pages are offering different types of values to users. And if you think about people who are coming to Kim Kardashian, the more entertainment-related pages out of boredom, compared to them coming here because of task work-related when they visit nuclear engineering, then it's possible that sort of the latter set of pages are the ones that are going to attract more higher donation out of this sense of reciprocity. And so we had three hypotheses going into our analyses. One is that pages on more task-oriented topics attract more donations. So again, sort of the task-oriented versus not distinction. The second is that pages on which users spend more time attract more donations. We're also thinking about the use, right? That potentially there's more utility benefits when they sort of engage more deeply. And I think that's also some of the findings from the Dub paper that I mentioned before. And third is that we also hypothesize that pages of higher quality attract more donations. So what we did is we were able to get the aggregated donation data from Wikimedia. And what we had essentially are data sets from the English donation campaign in 2015 and also the French one. And we got the per page data. So, for example, the Kim Kardashian page, we know the number of impressions, how many times it was shown, and also the number of donations that the page received. And so this is sort of the data that we have, and the donation rate is, the donation is how much is what we use as the outcome predictor. Or sorry, the outcome variable. So our first hypothesis here is to assess, trying to determine which pages will be classified as task-oriented versus non-task-oriented. And what we did is we downloaded the latest version of the page before the end of the donation campaign. So essentially, what the donors would have seen when in 2015 during the campaign. And we use Wikipedia as provided topic categories, and we traverse up to parent categories, as was done in some of the related work in determining what topics they are. We refer to that prior work on www that has classified sort of having these two clusters of task-oriented versus non-task-oriented pages, as I mentioned before. And the thing to note is that they use a topic modeling approach, and it's non-deterministic, so we wanted to use more of a leverage the existing wiki categories, which also means that one of the things is we needed to sort of determine what are the equivalent categories. And so this table kind of shows the equivalent categories that we had to map onto what Singer et al. Have found and explored in their work. The one key thing to note is that for the 21st century category, there was no direct equivalent mapping that we can found, so we didn't have that in our analysis. The second hypothesis was about how much time they spend on page. And so what we did is we calculated median dwell time per page, rely on user sessions, again, based on prior work, some of Aaron's prior work. For this, we used page view data from December 2017. One thing to note is that we weren't able to get all of the dwell time for all of the pages, so we ended up with only 86% of the English pages and 57% of the French pages. So that did sort of limit our data set a bit. We tried, in our analysis, we tried various models and sort of included dwell time and non-included dwell time, and it didn't generally affect sort of the results, but it's something to note and potential limitation of this work. And then for assessing content quality, I'm glad Aaron and Sage talked about this already, so I don't have to go into depth. Because of the sheer number of pages, we thought we could just leverage ORS in our analysis. Obviously, as mentioned before, there's still a question of whether or not this represents content quality, but it certainly factors in sort of structural quality. And some of the categories can be seen here. Basically, the highest quality will be the feature articles, and then you have the good articles, the B, C categories, and then there are also the equivalent categories for French, the French wiki. One of the things that we noted was noticed that when we were analyzing and looking at the pages that was categorized was that there also seemed to be a lot of subcategories within the start and stub categories that aren't necessarily providing content, but offers things like redirects, disambiguation, category description, list pages may refer to. And so we also separated those out in our analysis, as you'll see. So with that, we tested a number of different models, and I'll just present the sort of the main one here, where we looked at the negative, we created a negative binomial model because we're looking at the number of donations. It's a count variable, and I will step through some of these variables to help you interpret it. The first thing that we can talk about is number of page views and how that predicts donations. So the way to interpret it here is that because page view we log transformed, so it's basically saying that for every 10-fold increase in page views, the number of donation increased by 2.6 times. Okay. And I think this wouldn't be a surprise, and this would be pretty intuitive, right? So the more times that a page is shown, more likely it is to attract donations. Similarly, another thing to definitely point out is also that the French wiki attracted fewer donations. And in this case, so the numbers that are less than 1 means fewer, right? And so the French wiki actually had 0.75 as many, on average compared to the English wiki. Finally, I want to direct your attention here to page length. This is kind of interesting in that, so again, for every 10-fold increase in the number of characters in the article, there's actually a decrease in number of donations. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but it's something that might be worth exploring in future work as well. I'm going to pull out some of the predictor rows just so it's easier to see, but also going to step through the hypotheses. So for hypothesis 1, we're looking at the task-oriented versus non-task-oriented pages, and our results generally support our hypothesis. And so a few things to note is that, again, we picked out articles that are task-oriented, articles war and history, mathematics, technology, biology, and chemistry, literature, and arts. And we also picked out a set of articles that are determined to be non-task-oriented, sports, TVs, movies, and novels. And everything else is really used as a baseline in this analysis. So that's the comparison point here. So the way to interpret this again is that for mathematics, so for pages that are about mathematics, they're receive 1.67 times more donation compared to the baseline, whereas sports receive about half as much, a little bit more than half as much. And if we look at dwell time, again, our hypothesis is supported. The longer the people spend on the page, that helps predict the number of donations on the page as well. So those type of pages also generally attracted more donations. The longer it is, the more donations that they attract. Finally, when we look at the quality scores, I say it's partially supported here because there's some interesting sort of categories such as quality BA and also sort of may refer to. But again, the thing to note here is that the baseline comparison point is actually the highest quality, the feature articles. So what it's saying here is that compared to the feature articles, a lot of these other categories actually received fewer donations. But as I mentioned, there are some interesting relationships here that might deserve some additional look. And we were also trying to figure out what's kind of different about may refer to compared to other pages, right? And so in case you haven't seen, you don't know what I'm talking about, this will be an example of a may refer to page, right? And so this would be a page where when you go on it, you type in something and then it leads you to, well, this might refer to these things. So in some ways, it's providing, connecting users to related articles. In some ways, that's not quite different from what we're calling the disambiguation explicit category, which is, again, a list of topics related articles and help users disambiguate what they're trying to get to. One hypothesis that we have is that maybe the former, the may refer to, is trying to make an attempt to infer what the users are doing and trying to get them connected to the content closer, more quickly. And this also is similar to sort of, there's another type of disambiguation sort of category where, again, it's much more similar to may refer to, that I think maybe trying to There's a potential task-oriented argument here, but something that I'd love to discuss with you guys further and sort of see if you guys have any insights why these two types would actually result in different donation rates. So try to wrap this up a little bit. What are the implications? So theoretical implications, I think what we're showing here is that there's a reciprocity mechanism at play here, right? That there's a higher value utility pages can attract more donations. We looked at sort of the topics, we looked at it in terms of dwell time, and looked at in terms of quality. I think one of the things, as mentioned before, is that potentially sort of the ORS category, we shouldn't be thinking of that as a linear relationship, and so they might actually represent different types of articles. So that needs to be sort of looked into further. And also maybe pages that facilitate may be more valuable and offer more of a task utility compared to simply just showing users sort of a list of things and sort of let them figure out what they're trying to get at. But again, that's one hypothesis that we have. Another interesting finding here is that page length may have led to longer pages actually led to fewer donations. It might be something about these pages that are longer in nature, or it could also be, I think at one point we talked about sort of maybe page load time might be a factor at play here. And so, that might be something to explore in future work as well. The other point that I want to raise is that there's really kind of two potential mechanisms at play. And I think sort of another strand of future work could explore this further and see if we can tease it apart, right? So one is more of a self-selection argument where certain pages are, people are self-selecting into certain pages. And people who are primarily using sort of Wikipedia for work utility purposes are more likely to read some of these more technical pages, and hence sort of these pages are attracting more donation. But there's another potential argument, which is that instead of self-selection, it's just pretty much anyone who comes to the page, because the page is actually offering more value to them, that as part of their experience, then they make the donation contribution. One possible way of kind of teasing it apart might be to see when they make the donation. If it's sort of before, as soon as the page loads, then it might be more of the former type where the pages are attracting different types of users, and these people are sort of innately more appreciative of the service and more likely to make donation contributions, versus the latter type where looking at it post-use, where after they've used the pages and sort of then decide to make the donation contribution. I think there's also a lot of potential interesting design implications, and we're also sort of just thinking about this, and I'm just going to step through just some very quickly. Basically, one idea is maybe just reinforce indebtedness, right? So highlight potential for task-oriented utility for pages that may not be task-oriented in the nature. So, those pages about novels, right, can potentially say there's actually some sort of task-oriented benefit from these pages. Also, just highlight the high quality on the more task-oriented pages. This is a feature article to help sustain this high-level content, etc. That might strengthen, reinforce the sense of indebtedness. And maybe there's opportunity to think about more task-oriented feature support if we think that sort of this task-oriented utility is one of the factors influencing donation decisions. There's also opportunity here to trigger anticipated reciprocity. So for the lower quality pages, maybe can show what the article can be like in a year or two, given sufficient support, given comparables, and that might be a way to also solicit sort of strengthen donation on some of these pages. And with that, well, I did also make a donation contribution as part of this work, so I think in that sense, this work has made a difference already. But I'll end my presentation here.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Gary. I think we have plenty of time for questions, so I'm going to ask Miriam to relay anything from the IRC channel.
Yeah, so we have a couple of questions for Aaron and Sage. So actually, the first is not really a question. There has been a bit of discussion on language coverage of ORES. So maybe, Aaron, you can comment on that and just give us an idea of the language span of ORES.
Sure. Could you tell me, so I don't see the conversation inside of IRC, and I'm in the Hangout, so I'm not in YouTube.
It's in the YouTube channel. So the original question was, oh, I have to go back. There has been a lot of discussion. Oh yeah, when can ORES be deployed in wikis other than English? And then Dennis replied that is working for Spanish Wikipedia already. So maybe it's useful if you can comment on.
Sure. Yeah, I can comment on that. So ORES is currently, we have models deployed in 35 wikis. You know, just reading from the top: Arabic, Bengali, Catalan, Czech, German, Greek. And then I get to English. It's quite a long list. I'll post a link that generates the list of all wikis and all models into IRC. It's the ORES link that I just posted there, and that's what I was just reading from. Generally, we provide support for wikis when somebody requests it. We'll ask people to help us generate language resources for that wiki so that we can start building models for it. It's a little bit of a process, and it's definitely a bit of work to get data to train the model, but we're really happy to get ORES set up for whoever wants it, and we've had a lot of success by the evidence by the 35 wikis that we do have support for.
Okay, thanks. And then we had a question for Sage. Just where can we see the scores that you presented for individual articles?
Sure. So for English Wikipedia, those scores are available on Programs and Events dashboard and the WikiEd dashboard on the Articles tab. So article development is the link in the Articles tab for each individual article, and that will show the ORES kind of trajectory of that article over the course of time that it was being edited for that project.
Okay, I think Dario had one for you as well. He put himself in line, so I think Dario is your turn. Okay, yeah, I have one question for Aaron and one for Gary, but I'm going to cover ORES first. So I was really interested in the part of the presentation where you talked about how tool developers handle concepts such as precision recall and the notion of a threshold. And it strikes me that there are many systems out there where tool developers or end users are actually expected to have some level of literacy around what it means to, you know, tune a model in a way that supports their curation activities. And I'm wondering if there's any literature on like computational literacy around like people engaging these kind of like peer production activities. Sounds like a fascinating topic for qualitative research to complement the work you guys are doing.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with that. To my knowledge, there's no real context that's like this, where somebody is deploying a machine learning prediction service in a real world context, where the users are empowered to use the prediction itself as opposed to use some user interface that kind of provides a shrink wrapping around the prediction. You know, like contrast Facebook's news feed, which just sort of sorts things for you, with ORES that gives you a score that you could sort in one direction or another. You could combine it with other scores. You can completely reinterpret it. You know, as Sage has been doing. So I don't know of anybody who's really looking in this space, and I don't think that there's work that really pushes on this point. Although there is work that looks at if you do have a shrink wrapped interface, what should you report to people so that they understand what confidence means in the context of a machine learning model. I think that's really different from solving the problem of helping tool developers know what sort of, like, how to turn their operational concerns into, say, fitness statistics or thresholds so that they can use the prediction model effectively and, you know, not have their auto revert bot banned. I would love it if others would come and do research into this area. There's a pretty big critical algorithm studies research area that I think is, you know, they're very focused on the Google, Facebook, and Twitters of the world. And I think that there's a huge opportunity to look at, you know, ORs and quality practices in Wikimedia context, because, I mean, honestly, they're all calling for transparency, and we're the future. We've had transparency forever, and we've got the next set of problems. So come study our stuff.
Nice pitch. Sorry, that was unintentional. Sweet. I have also a question for Gary. I don't know if I can abuse my my slot. Yes. Okay. Cool. So Gary, first off, I'm relaying some comments from people in the fundraising team that are watching the presentation remotely. We have Caitlin here, also in the Hangout. And I'll say, like, this exciting research, I think, is going to open up like a more questions for additional research. I'm actually very excited also about the fact that it lies at the intersection of many distinct strands of research. There's the quality control part and how this can be used to characterize the nature of these pages. There's the idea of, like, understanding the or reconstructing the demographic of readers as a function of well, the interplay between content and readers, and this new angle of donations with this new data. So I'm really excited about like this intersection of the different streams. I have one question about the dwell time part specifically, because obviously there's a big gap, a big temporal gap between the data for donations and the data, the period during which the dwell time was computed. So I was curious if you could elaborate on the robustness of this, given the time lag.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that's certainly a limitation, and you know, if we somehow had the 2015 data, that would be great. Or even if we start analyzing the 2017, that would be awesome as well. I think part of it is if we're buying into this topic argument, right, then it's really about sort of the topic and the uses. And in that sense, some of these maybe should be fairly stable over time, assuming that the content hasn't changed that much. I suppose one of the things that we could do is to look at really sort of a quick diff between the 2017 version and the 2015 version that we're looking at, to see whether or not there's a big quality diff or sort of a number of characters that might influence dwell time. But assuming there isn't, I think, you know, if the usage is similar, right? Again, the underlying point here is that those people who are using the nuclear engineering page is going to be different from those who are visiting the Kim Kardashian page out of boredom. So
right. Yeah, I'm also thinking about like a potential seasonality effects, given the nature of like what happens with traffic in December. Right. As well as ways of controlling for this using like other type of traffic related data that we have.
Right, and I think that's one of the reasons why we chose chose December, because at least we were trying to match similar time of year.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Are there other questions from people in the Hangout or on IRC?
Yeah. So we have a question from Alex to Gary. How does page language affect donation within the buckets Gary hypothesized?
How does page language affect donation? So we're just finding out a main effect of French Wiki receiving fewer donations than English Wiki, which again I don't think it would be surprising. We tested the model separately, so we did the model for the French versus the one for English, and again, in terms of our hypotheses, the effects were pretty consistent across those models. So at that level, there isn't quite a difference. But there are sort of little nuances that and sort of a noise that I think we'll need to look at further. For example, like the OR score. I think my understanding is that it actually means different things potentially across different language. Or sort of it's kind of predicting different things, so that we'll need to dig a little bit deeper into as well. But there might certainly also be sort of cultural differences. I mean, I would certainly envision that the French wiki tend to attract the French more than the English wiki, and there's potentially a lot of interesting research questions there. The only challenge with the English wiki is also because it's much more global, so we're probably not going to be able to observe the cultural difference effects as strongly as if we compare to another set of data.
Okay, and then we have a question from IRC from Rage Sauce. I think you pronounce it like that. So 10-fold increase in page views leads to 2.6-fold increase in donations. So less popular articles are far more valuable on per view basis versus highly popular articles. Niche versus mainstream, narrow versus broad. So this is the question for you.
I don't know if that would be my interpretation. So basically, I think the general finding is that there's a high correlation between the number of impressions and the number of donations, and that's just part of the. I think there are potentially multiple explanations. One is just that pages that aren't going to be seen aren't going to have people donate on it, but it also could be something sort of qualitatively different about sort of high pages with high impressions and high view counts. But I don't think the takeaway here is that the niche pages are better than is that what the question was?
Yeah, I mean, I was struck by you presented that correlation between page views and donations, but it's not linear. It's not just the case that a page that has twice as many page views can expect twice as many donations. It can expect less than twice as many. So like the long tail is doing proportionally more of the work than the page views that it's serving up. Is that a correct interpretation?
I think we may have lost Gary. The video is frozen.
Me as well.
We cannot hear you, Gary. No, we lost you.
Hi. Sorry. Can you guys hear me? Okay. Yeah, I think that's the right interpretation.
Cool. That's super provocative and interesting, and like I would love to see like the next generation of like studies teasing apart what we can learn about like how people value what they're reading.
Yeah. Although I will say I would let me double check on that before I say that too firmly, because we weren't looking at it that way, but I think that's certainly a really interesting point. So let me dig into that a little bit deeper before confirming on that.
Okay, from the IRC, I think we have no more questions. On the YouTube channel, had a lot of discussions, and people were very enthusiastic in general about the multivariate analysis. So I'm not sure if I should report the comments, but people just love the few slides regarding the analysis, so it generated a lot of interest.
I see there's a question here from Caitlin. Caitlin, if you want to ask it directly since you're here.
That actually wasn't a question. That was like in response to one of the questions from IRC that was asking like what the differences that we're seeing between languages. And I just wanted to note that like there are and like the quality between like different language articles and how that might affect donation rates. And there are just additional variables at play in terms of the fundraising content itself between like an English and a French banner. And I think like those differences might be statistically greater potentially than the motivation that the donor is feeling just from reading the article. But I can't say that with any sort of data to back me up. Since I'm unmuted, Gary, thank you for doing this research. I think it makes a lot of sense. We have done like some degree of targeted testing toward banners. We did it with like some Olympic related articles during the Olympics, and we did like a Game of Thrones-ish banner when the Game of Thrones article or when the Game of Thrones show premiered. Your research would suggest that we were targeting the wrong kind of article. So it at least gives us a reason to try again with a different focus. I think we do like, I don't know that we want to make the argument that we won't serve banners to visitors of the Kim Kardashian article because we still need to get the word out there about our brand. But we might want to try to do that differently. It's not easy to do, to show really specific content for specific articles, but I think we're interested in it. So this gives us a good rabbit hole to fall down.
Thanks. Yeah, I think we certainly also had similar challenges when we're thinking about the design implications, which is, you know, I don't think the right recommendation is not to show those banners on Kim Kardashian pages, but maybe sort of reframe it in other ways that might be more effective. Yeah, so love to chat more about this as well.
Cool. Yeah, I'm not sure I have your email, but let's talk.
We'll connect you for sure.
Thank you, Daria.
All right, I don't see other questions from IRC or from the audience. Am I right, Miriam? Yep. Okay, so big virtual round of applause to our speakers. Thanks all for joining. And thanks to everyone on IRC and on YouTube. I'm waiting. I haven't seen your comments, but I know you're there. And see you all next month. The date is unusual. We'll be having our showcase on the 13th of June. So I look forward to see you then.